the sexually explicit miniatures, for good or for bad. Now, you say this Blemmy is looking at the viewer, which is a very unusual stance in medieval manuscripts. Usually you have the subject looking sideways, but here we have a straightforward look, and this monster is holding the frame of the miniature in which he finds himself in. Now, this monstrosity is something that we marvel at perhaps today, but in the Middle Ages there wasn't this sharp barrier that we have today between what is imaginary and what is factual. Unfortunately, we cannot access that state of mind where it was very easy to cross the border from human to plant, to animal, to monster, and back again. Here we have a scene, a detail from the Roman d'Alexandre, which shows a world gone mad, a topsy-turvy world, a monde renversé. The hunter in this romance, and you know that the romance is a medieval genre in which there is a narrative of the martial feats of arms of a knight, and usually there is a love component. So there's war, there's chivalry, but also there's love and there's courtesy. Now, in the margin of this otherwise regular romance, we find a monde renversé. We find a hunter who is hunted by the rabbit he is hunting. You see the rabbit there hunting the man with a crossbow and taking him back home. Now, this is another curious drawing from an astrology manuscript. Sorry, I didn't include the exact reference, just the name of the manuscript, Harley 647. But this is basically an astrology book. Now, you see the red dots represent a constellation, and this is a rabbit. Now, this rabbit is partly drawn and partly written. See how writing itself becomes a form of drawing. Here we have perhaps the double hybridity of using scripts and drawing, but also using these media to represent a constellation. These are the red dots that you can see. Now, another funny detail from the Golestan Psalter, which, allow me to remind you, is a religious book. A psalter is a collection of religious texts, usually for the private use of a noble person. Now, this detail from the Golestan Psalter shows a duck being abducted by a cunning, say, fox. Now, interestingly, this has very little to do with the Bible, except if we interpret it symbolically in terms of perhaps the duck being symbolic of innocence, the fox being symbolic of devilish temptation, whatever. But then this might be an overstretched interpretation, and perhaps the reason for this is just to alleviate the tension of reading a religious book by including this marginal or similar marginal drawings, or called doodles. Now, you probably noticed that one user added quack, added a representation of the sound, as a written representation of the sound that the duck makes. And so here we have not just a graphic representation, but also an audio representation of what's going on in this scene. Now, as I said, this elaborate art in medieval manuscripts could be as simple as having to do with a simple decoration of an initial here, see the letter N. So this is simply a decoration, and in this decoration we have a floral motif. We have the letter N, but then how beautiful! Look at how beautiful it is. Now, at other times, we have a zoomorphic initial. Now, this initial, this dragon, is the letter S. Is the letter S. We still have time, don't we? We still have the whole afternoon. This zoomorphic initial is basically the letter S, but then it is depicted as a dragon. And in the next example, we have a zoo-anthropomorphic detail from a miniature of Christ in Majesty with the symbols of the evangelists. You see in the previous slide, we saw a zoomorphic initial, the dragon, representing the letter S. In this slide, we see Christ and well, there's an angel or someone who looks like an angel. Of course, this is one of the evangelists. Now, then we have, you see, depictions of animals: eagle, bull, and lion. We might be tempted to see these as perhaps monsters, as threats to Christ or something, but in fact they are representations of the of three evangelists. I think only Saint Mark isn't represented as an animal. You see this fluidity, how easy it is to be a saint and one of the four evangelists for that matter, and at the same time be represented as an animal. Now, I'll go through these a bit quicker. This inhabited initial shows, if you can see, shows a heart. Shows a heart intertwined in foliage. Now, I guess you will recognize this. This is a historiated initial. Historiated means an initial that has a story within it. that is at the same time symbolic, as a sign, as a letter, and then it is also narrative. You probably recognize this, don't you? This is a scene from the story of the prophet Jonah, and how he disobeyed God. He left Nineveh, and how he was displeased with God's, with what he perceived as God's mercy with these infidels, whatever. And so he was kind of displeased with God, and he left. Now, this is a depiction of his punishment, how God sent a storm to threaten the barge on which he was, the boat on which he was sailing. So here we see it's a story that that has a direct, straightforward meaning. People could recognize it, and here we touch upon one of the utilitarian uses of hybridity in the medieval manuscript. There is the aesthetic aspect, there's the aesthetic dimension, there's the entertainment dimension, but here there is the didactic dimension. These are, remember, precious books that were often used in churches and in monasteries to teach and to educate, to illustrate stories from the Bible, from the Bible mainly, to churchgoers or to the faithful. Now, this is an example of again, a copy, this is an example, an extract from a biblical, from a Bible. Here we have the historiated initial with the monks reading from a lectern. Then we have, at the bottom, we have a curious doodle of, I wonder if you can see, a cock reading to a fox. Now, what possibly can be the relationship between reading in the historiated initial and reading in the doodle? See, it's again another instance of double complexity. There is hybridity in representing the pious activity of reading from the Bible, but also that activity is itself challenged by the funny doodle at the bottom, and the user is free to interpret what that means. You probably didn't miss the blue and red commentaries on this biblical passage, Now, let me move very quickly to the politics of this poetics. Now, hybridity isn't always didactic for the sake of didacticism or aesthetics. Sometimes it illustrates, but it also reveals, represents, betrays stereotypes. It portrays, reveals, uncovers stereotypes about others. Now, I invite you to have a look at this bizarre hybrid woman. You see this is detailed from Wonders of the East. Now, this woman is half goat, half human, and she covers her intimate parts, but there are some explicit eliminations, I assure you, but just for the sake of, out of respect, I didn't at least put them and didn't include them. You see, this has to do with the imaginary, with the collective, perhaps, imaginary of the other, of the gendered other, of the racialized other. Now, as another example of this plasticity of the category of otherness in the medieval manuscript, here we have very bizarre creatures, hybrid human, animals, floral creatures. From the Hereford world map, it's not very clear, unfortunately, that here we can see lots of wild creatures, and in the following slide from the same manuscript, we can see humans in different stages of development, perhaps in different, having different forms. Some have 2 legs, some have more, some have hands, some have trunks. This is a depiction of the monstrous races, of monstrous otherness. You understand that these monstrous races are not in the center. They're not depicted in Europe, in Christian Europe, but they inhabit the outskirts of the known world. Now, again, in line with this cultural, with the medieval manuscript as a carrier of not just art and knowledge, but also of stereotypes. Here we have a detail from the Oscar Psalter with a floral hybrid, a floral human hybrid of a Saracen, of a Muslim, that is threatening, you might see, the Christian congregation. The Christians are praying, and the Muslim monstrosity threatens them with his oversized sword. Now, it's not always nice, but in the following slide is just a joke. Here we have an excerpt from the Grande Chronique de France, where we have a Christian army confronting what seems like an army of devils. Now, these are not devils,